Hello everyone, how are you all? I hope you all are okay and safe at your places. I, Abhishek Shukla, your ICT instructor from Cambridge International School, Disua, once again welcome you all in e-learning session. My dear students, before we begin today's session, there's a beautiful quote by Aristotle which I would like to share with all of you. And the quote is, if you would understand anything, then observe its beginning and its development. Let's begin with today's e-learning session. And before we start today's topic, let's discuss or let's have a quick recap on the previous topics we discussed so far. In our last lesson, we discussed about elements of communication cycle where we discuss all the elements of communication cycle in depth. The elements like sender, messages, encoding, communication channels, receiver, decoding, and last but not the least, feedback. Now, start with today's session. In today's session, we are going to discuss about the means of oral communication, what is symbolic communication, means of written communication, and perspectives in communication along with the factors affect our perspective of communication. So, let's begin with today's first topic. Oral communication. Oral communication is a part of verbal communication, as we discussed earlier also about oral communication. When a message or information is communicated to others by speaking or through words of mouth, it is called as oral communication. When we use oral communication, we get immediate feedback or response to our message from the listeners. In oral communication, spoken words are used. It includes face-to-face conversation, speech, telephonic conversation, video, radio, television, voice over internet. In oral communication, communication is influenced by pitch, volume, speed, and clarity of speaking. Now let's move on to the pros and cons of oral communication. First, among the advantages of oral communication is time saving. In this, the delivery of the message is quick instead of writing the contents and passing through the form of written mean. Second, in this is quick feedback. In oral communication, sender get quick and immediate feedback from their listeners. Next is effective for all. If we have number of people or public around us, then the oral means of communications are effective for all. Next, among the advantages of communication is flexibility. In oral communication, the contents are flexible. If the sender wants to change the content, then he or she can change the content at the time. Along with the advantages of oral communication, there are number of drawbacks also of oral communication. Drawbacks like no legal validity. There is no legal validity of the content which is verbal or the content which is delivered orally. Next is absence of permanent record. If we communicate from one end to another end in a oral manner or in a verbal manner, then there will be an absence of permanent record of that conversation. Next, among the disadvantages of oral communication is confused speech. This is one fear factor because most of the time the sender may get confused with the public or with the audience. So all these are the drawbacks or the disadvantages which comes in the way of oral communication. Let's move on to the means of oral communication. Students, we have learnt that when communication takes place through word of mouth, it is known as oral or voice-based communication. So, the following are some important devices for this. Telephone. The telephone is the most popular mean of voice-based communication between individuals. It is extensively used by individuals, business, and governments. Mobile phones are a modern wireless variant of the traditional wired based phones. They give unhindered connectivity to the people while on the move through audio or through voice based communication. Next, among the means of oral communication is radio and television. Both radio and television are means of mass communication that allow audio and audio-visual communication respectively to the masses over a large geographical area. Move on to the next segment, symbolic communication. All communication is achieved through the use of symbols, and symbol takes the form of words, sounds, gestures, ideas or visual images that are used to convey other ideas and belief is considered as symbolic communication. Symbolic communication uses certain signs and symbols to communicate a message. And to understand this symbolic communication, let's take an example of traffic light. Traffic lights are used to convey a definite meaning to the people with traveling on the road, which help to control the movement of traffic. Let's talk about the areas and the uses of symbolic communication. Students, you might have noticed number of special people to communicate with one another with the use of gestures or with the use of special languages. And those special languages and gestures are considered in symbolic communication. Like special people uses this language to communicate with each other, like deaf and blind people. They use special type of signs and gesture based languages for the purpose of communication. And here on the screen you can see two examples. The above example is the sign language used by the deaf people, or we can say the special people. And the below mentioned is the Braille script, the script which is specially used by the blind person to communicate their feelings, their ideas, their thoughts with others. Next, means of communication, written communication. Written communication is when the message or information is passed to others in the written form, then communication is said to be a written communication. It means the sending of messages, orders, or instructions in writing through letters, circulars, manuals, reports, telegrams, etc. It is a formal method of communication, and there are certain things to keep in mind to do this, like use simple words, keep the message brief, give fact to support your viewpoint, give appropriate captions for graphical elements. These are some things that we need to keep in mind before we start written communication. Now, move on to the advantages and the disadvantages of written communication. Among the advantages, the first is it is a permanent means of communication. Written communication is happen in a real time with all the evidence in written manner. It provides ready records and references. When we are going to interact with someone in a written manner, then it will be a permanent record and the reference with us for that communication. Next is legal defenses can depend upon written communication as it provides valid records. When we are going to present any of the record, then written is the legal defense which can be act as a valid record at that point of time. Now, among the disadvantages of written communication. Written communication does not save upon the cost because, as we know, to write the content we must have stationery with us, we must have gadgets with us upon which we need to jot down the things. So, in terms of cost, it cannot be a user friendly. Next is written communication is time consuming as the feedback is not immediate. Unlike oral communication, the feedback and the responses in written communication take time. Next is too much paperwork and email burden is involved. Now, to communicate in a written manner, we must need to write the contents over the paper or in electronic form, and we have to spend much of time on that. So, these are the advantages and disadvantages of written communication. Students, now let's get started with the means and the modes of written communication. We have learnt earlier that when communication takes place through written words, it is known as the written communication. So, here are some important means of written communication. Start with the first one, postal services. This is the oldest mean of communicating written messages. Through this, written messages and documents are physically transferred from one place to another place, which is also considered as journal postal mail. And now, second among this is letters. Letters are the conventional method of formal communication between people in society, governments, organizations, etc. Throughout history and even today, people use letter to share information, issue orders, give instructions and guidelines within an institution or organization. As you see, there are a number of letters being posted in your classes or outside the classes on the information board or the notices board. So, these are the means of written communication. Next, in terms of written communication is fax. Fax, or the term called as facsimile. Fax machines provide a way to communicate lengthy messages over long distances in the same format as the original message. It works through telephone lines, and these are the machines which are similar to as scanners or printers, where we need to input the data in hard form and the same data will get delivered on over a long distance with the same hard data. Now, next among the means of written communication is email. An email is an internet-based service that allows people to communicate a written message electronically anywhere across the world in a few seconds. Most people, institutions, and organizations use email to communicate with each other, and this is the fastest mean of written communication where the sender can get immediate feedback. Next in the list for means of written communication is website. Websites are internet pages that communicate information in the written form through the World Wide Web or WWW, and the WWW is the largest global library of information where we get information in the means of writing or multimedia. Let's move ahead with the new topic, perspective of communication. Perspective. Our perspective refers to our approach or point of view about something. Different social scientists have studied human communication from different perspectives or approaches. It is one's idea and one's approach that how they understand and how they react to the communication. And there are a number of perspectives in communication. So let's start with the different perspective in communication. The first in the sequence is technical perspective. Technical perspective is also considered as one-way communication. The technical perspective sees communication as a linear process communicated through channels. Here, the emphasis is on the transmission of the message with the less attention given to the outcome or effort of the messages on the receiver. And we know very well that the communication is said to be effective or successful if the communication or if the receiver send the feedback. Otherwise, it is not successful. This is termed as breakdown in communication. Technical communicators may put the information they capture into paper document, web pages, computer-based training, digitally stored text, audio, video, and other media. And they all are act as a channel. And the focus is being given on the channels rather than the understanding of the message on the receiver. Second in the queue for perspective in communication is psychological perspective. Theories of communication develop from psychological perspective state that messages are filtered primarily through individuals, not through channels, as stated in the technical approach. This perspective assumes that one person's outward behavior affect the cognition or behavior of another. Such influences contribute to the messages sent and the feedback received. The target here is to arrive at a consistent communication between the sender and the receiver, thereby reducing uncertainties in the message's meaning. The third one, pragmatic communication. Pragmatic communication or pragmatic perspective is a way of dealing with something based on practical considerations rather than theoretical ones. A pragmatic person deals with the things in a practical way. According to the pragmatic perspective, communication consists of a system of interlocking, independent behaviors that become a pattern over time. Pragmatic perspective urges that the act of communication is much like playing a game, with the sender receiver becoming partner when they decide to communicate. Talking is like a move or a turn, where the speaker and the listener alternate their roles. Simply, we can say this is a learning or this is a communication through play-way methods in practical. Now, the last in the queue, social constructionist perspective. The social constructionist perspective states that we never experience the world directly. We take significant part of it, process them according to ourselves, and connect them to other things we know, then respond to them in a ways our society or culture sees significant. Here in this, the audience or the receiver, they have their own ideas about the message conveyed by the sender. They process the message by themselves, according to themselves or according to the society. And most of what we know and believe about the world come through communication. Culture itself is a web of interconnected acts of communication. To understand this, you can see the examples given on the screen. Here on the screen, the example is given that sender wants to convey what message to the receiver, and receiver understood the message in what ways. Now, that's it for today's session. I hope you all must understand the topics clearly. Now, at the end, let's quickly recap the topics which we discussed in today's session. Means of oral communication, symbolic communication, means of written communication, and different perspective in communication. Now, before we sum up the topic, here we have some brainstorming exercises. Here you can see the questions on your screen. You need to attempt each and every question by yourself, and along with that, one worksheet will be provided to you people, and you have to solve the worksheet by yourself. We'll be back with the next session. Till then, goodbye, take care, and have a nice time.